Welcome to Life Stories, where we share incredible real-life journeys of courage and resilience. Today's story takes us on a life-changing flight where a young girl's trembling note sparked a chain of events that saved lives and inspired hope. This is a tale of bravery, compassion, and the power of speaking up, even in the darkest moments. It's a reminder that one small act can ignite lasting change. Subscribe to Life Stories to hear extraordinary accounts that will move your heart and inspire you to believe in the strength of the human spirit. Let's begin today's story. It was an ordinary day on the job. Or so I thought. The morning air buzzed with the familiar symphony of an airport rolling suitcases. Hurried footsteps. The drone of announcements reminding passengers not to leave their bags unattended. I had been a flight attendant for over a decade. And this was just another day in the sky. Or so it seemed. As I stood at the gate, greeting passengers with my standard warm smile, my eyes caught a peculiar sight. A tall man in a crisp navy suit was striding confidently down the jet bridge. He carried himself with the kind of assurance that only came from money or power, or perhaps both. His silver hair gleamed under the harsh airport lights, and he exuded an air of calm authority. His leather shoes clicking sharply against the floor. But it wasn't him that caught my attention. Beside him, holding his hand, was a young girl. No older than 12. She had her gaze fixed firmly on the ground, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders like a curtain shielding her from the world. Her backpack, a vivid shade of purple, seemed almost comically large against her small frame. She clutched it to her chest with both hands, her knuckles white with tension. "Good morning," I greeted them, trying to make eye contact with her. "Welcome aboard." The man, Richard Hayes, according to his boarding pass, nodded politely but curtly. His deep voice carried the smooth, polished tone of someone used to getting what they wanted. "Thank you," he replied, offering no further conversation. The girl didn't look up. Not once. As the rest of the passengers filed in, my mind kept wandering back to her. I had seen countless children fly, some brimming with excitement, others nervous about their first time in the air. But there was something about this girl, Sarah. Her boarding pass had said that unsettled me. She wasn't shy in the usual sense, she was shrinking into herself, as if trying to disappear entirely. Once we were airborne, I moved through the cabin, performing my usual duties with practiced ease. Coffee here, a glass of water there. When I reached their row, Richard ordered black coffee with a brisk, no-nonsense tone. Before I could address Sarah, he spoke for her. "She'll have apple juice," he said, offering a tight smile. I handed her the juice, trying again to connect. "That's a nice backpack you have," I said softly. "Purple is my favorite color too." Before Sarah could respond, Richard intervened. "She's just shy," he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Thank you for the drinks." Dismissed. I moved on. But the feeling of unease lingered. Over the years, I had developed a sharp intuition for people. It was an unspoken part of the job, reading moods, sensing tensions, anticipating needs. And something about this pair didn't sit right. I kept glancing back at them as I moved through the cabin. Richard flipped through a magazine with an air of nonchalance. But Sarah sat motionless, clutching her backpack as if it were her lifeline. Her shoulders were hunched, her small frame taking up as little space as possible. As I passed by again with the trash cart, I felt a slight tug on my sleeve. Looking down, I saw Sarah's trembling hand pressing a folded piece of paper into my palm. Her eyes flicked toward me for the briefest moment, wide and filled with something I can only describe as desperation. Then she turned away, staring out the window as if nothing had happened. My heart raced as I continued down the aisle, the note burning in my hand. Once I reached the galley, I unfolded it with trembling fingers. The words, scrawled in shaky pencil, made my blood run cold. "There's someone in the cargo hold. They need help." He put him there. I read it again, my hands shaking. A chill ran down my spine. and I felt the weight of the words settle heavily in my chest. Someone was in the cargo hold? How could that be possible? My instincts screamed at me that this was no prank. Sarah's trembling hand, her haunted eyes, they spoke volumes. I glanced toward their row. Richard was still engrossed in his magazine, his demeanor as calm as ever. Sarah, on the other hand, looked rigid, her small hands clutching the armrests now. My unease turned into alarm. If her note was true, then whoever was in the cargo hold might not have much time. Taking a deep breath to steady myself, I walked briskly toward the cockpit. My mind raced with questions. Who was in the cargo hold? How had they gotten there? And what kind of man was Richard Hayes? Knocking on the cockpit door, I steadied my voice as I relayed the message to the pilot. His expression turned grave as he nodded. Moments later, his voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've identified a mechanical issue that requires immediate attention. As a precaution, we'll be making an emergency landing at the nearest airport. Please remain calm and seated with your seat belts fastened. The cabin erupted in nervous whispers. Passengers exchanged anxious glances, their unease palpable. But Richard Hayes remained calm, flipping another page of his magazine. His composure only deepened my suspicion. Meanwhile, Sarah sat stiffly beside him, her knuckles white as she gripped the armrests. I couldn't shake the feeling that the danger was far closer than anyone realized. The announcement from the captain sent ripples of unease through the cabin. Passengers shifted nervously in their seats, some clutching their armrests, others pulling out their phones to send hurried messages. The man in 14C muttered under his breath about a delayed meeting, while an elderly woman across the aisle clutched a rosary, her lips moving in silent prayer. The tension was thick. But one person stood out in stark contrast, Richard Hayes. He remained composed, the magazine still open on his lap, his expression calm and indifferent. But Sarah's reaction was the opposite. Her small hands gripped the armrests so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She stared straight ahead, her chest rising and falling rapidly. I knew her fear wasn't about the emergency landing, it was something far deeper. I moved through the aisle, trying to maintain a sense of calm. That's part of the job as a flight attendant, making passengers feel secure even when you're anything but. Yet, every time I glanced at Sarah, the pit in my stomach grew. Something was terribly wrong, and I couldn't ignore it. As the plane began its descent, I stationed myself near the galley, pretending to organize supplies. In reality, I was stealing glances at Richard. His stillness unsettled me, while other passengers fidgeted and whispered. His demeanor remained unnervingly composed, as if he knew exactly what was happening and how it would end. The landing was smooth, almost too smooth for an emergency. Through the window, I could see flashing lights, emergency vehicles lined up on the tarmac, their sirens silent but their presence loud. My heart raced as the plane came to a halt, the engines winding down with a low hum. I stood near the exit, watching as a group of uniformed security personnel boarded the plane. The lead officer was direct. "We need access to the cargo hold immediately." I guided them to the rear of the plane, my hands trembling as I unlocked the door leading to the lower compartments. The officers descended, their radios crackling softly. The muffled sound of movement and urgent voices reached my ears. And then came a shout, "We need medical assistance immediately." My breath caught as two paramedics rushed past me, carrying a stretcher. Moments later, they emerged from the cargo hold, carefully lifting a boy onto the stretcher. He couldn't have been more than 10 years old. His skin was ashen, his clothes dirty and torn, and his frail frame spoke of days, maybe weeks, without proper food or care. My chest tightened at the sight. It was Sarah's voice that pulled me from my daze. "That's Tariq," she cried, her small frame suddenly animated. She tried to run toward him, but Richard's hand shot out, gripping her wrist tightly. "Sit down," he said through gritted teeth. his calm facade slipping for the first time. The officers didn't miss the interaction. Two of them approached Richard, their faces stern. "Sir, we need you to come with us." Richard's polished demeanor cracked slightly. "I don't know anything about this," he insisted, standing abruptly. "I've never seen that boy before in my life. This is absurd." His voice rose with each word, drawing attention from other passengers. Sarah, meanwhile, was trembling in her seat, her wide eyes darting between Richard and Tariq. As the paramedics carried Tariq past them, Sarah suddenly bolted from her seat. She ran straight into my arms, wrapping herself around my waist like a lifeline. Her voice was barely a whisper, but the weight of her words hit me like a freight train. "He's going to hurt me next. Don't let him take me." I placed a protective hand on her shoulder, a silent promise that I wouldn't let anything happen to her. My heart ached at the terror in her voice, at the way she clung to me as if I were her last hope. Whatever had happened to Tariq, she had witnessed it, or worse, lived through it, and I knew in that moment that I couldn't let her down. As Richard was escorted off the plane, his protests echoing down the aisle, I stayed with Sarah. She refused to let go of me, her small body trembling uncontrollably. The weight of her fear, of her trust, settled over me like a heavy blanket. I didn't know what kind of man Richard was, but I knew one thing for certain: Sarah and Tariq needed help, and I was going to make sure they got it. The airport was buzzing with activity as emergency responders worked tirelessly to stabilize Tariq and transport him to the nearest hospital. Sarah clung to my side, refusing to let go, her tiny fingers gripping the fabric of my uniform. Every so often, she'd glance toward the plane's door, as if expecting Richard to return at any moment. Once the authorities had secured the scene, a social worker arrived to take Sarah into custody temporarily. She was a kind woman, her voice soft and reassuring. But Sarah wouldn't budge from my side. "I want to stay with her," she whispered, looking up at me with tear-filled eyes. I knelt down to meet her gaze, smoothing a stray strand of hair from her face. "I'll stay with you, sweetheart," I promised. "You're safe now." We were escorted to a private room at the airport, away from the noise and commotion. Sarah sat curled up on a chair, clutching her purple backpack as if it were her armor. The social worker, a woman named Karen Thompson, gently tried to coax her into talking, but Sarah remained silent, her gaze fixed on the floor. I could see the tension in her small frame, the way her shoulders hunched as if she were bracing for an impact. After a few moments of quiet, I decided to take a different approach. "Sarah," I began softly, pulling a chair closer to hers. "I know you're scared, but anything you can tell us might help Tariq. He's safe now, but we need to know what happened so we can protect you both." Her lip quivered, and for a moment, I thought she wouldn't respond. Then, in a voice so small I almost missed it, she began to speak. "After the accident, we didn't have anyone," she said, her words halting as if she were piecing together a puzzle. "Mom and Dad, they were driving home from work. It was raining so hard. The car, it flipped." I reached out and gently held her hand, giving her a reassuring squeeze. "I'm so sorry, Sarah." She nodded, swallowing hard before continuing. "After that, they put us in foster care. That's when Richard found us. At first, he was so nice. He bought us new clothes, let us pick out toys. But then, he changed. He started watching everything we did. He wouldn't let us talk to anyone at school. And Tariq," her voice cracked, and she took a shaky breath. "Tariq said he heard Richard talking on the phone about delivering the package. He said it was us." My stomach twisted as her words sank in. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fall into place. But the picture they painted was horrifying. "Did Tariq tell you anything else?" I asked gently. Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "He told me we had to do something, or he'd take us both. That's why he hid in the cargo hold. He said someone might find him and help us. Karen and I exchanged a look. The weight of Sarah's story pressing down on both of us. It was clear now that Richard wasn't just a controlling foster parent, he was involved in something far darker. Do you know who Richard was talking to on the phone? Karen asked softly. Sarah hesitated. Then whispered. Someone named Miguel. He said Miguel would pay double if he brought us both. The room fell silent. The gravity of her words hanging heavy in the air. I felt a surge of protectiveness for this brave little girl who had endured so much and yet found the courage to speak up. Karen took Sarah's hand and said gently, "You did the right thing. Sarah. You're so brave. And we're going to make sure he can't hurt you or Tariq ever again." I stayed with Sarah until she fell asleep, her head resting against my shoulder. As I sat there, holding this small, fragile girl who had been through so much, I felt a deep sense of responsibility. Whatever it took, I was going to see this through. Sarah and Tariq deserved justice and a chance to feel safe again. The days following the emergency landing were a whirlwind. Sarah and Tariq were placed in protective custody, while the authorities began piecing together the case against Richard Hayes. The more I learned, the heavier the weight on my shoulders grew. This was no isolated incident. Richard was part of something much larger. A network operating in the shadows, preying on the most vulnerable. I stayed in touch with Karen, the social worker, who kept me updated on Sarah and Tariq. Sarah, she said, was opening up more, though she still clung to her backpack like a lifeline. Tariq, however, had retreated into silence. He wouldn't speak, wouldn't make eye contact, but he was drawing constantly. Karen mentioned that his sketches were detailed and haunting, filled with images that hinted at what they had endured. Then came the court hearings. Richard, flanked by his team of high-powered lawyers, maintained his polished demeanor, his expression one of feigned confusion and indignation. His legal team painted him as a misunderstood philanthropist who had taken in troubled children and been repaid with baseless accusations. It was infuriating to watch. The prosecution, however, was methodical. Sarah's testimony was the cornerstone of their case. But the prosecutor, a sharp and compassionate woman named Diane Porter, knew it wasn't enough on its own. They needed more hard evidence that could tie Richard to the trafficking network. It was Tariq's drawings that provided the breakthrough. Karen had carefully preserved his sketchbook, knowing it might hold crucial clues. One afternoon, she called me to the protective facility to see what Tariq had drawn, sitting across from him in a quiet room. I watched as he hesitated, then slid the notebook across the table toward me. The sketches were chilling. One depicted a man with a snake tattoo coiled around his forearm. Another showed a layout of a warehouse, complete with crates, stacks of money, and a van parked outside. Karen and I exchanged a look, realizing these weren't just drawings, they were evidence. "Tariq," I said softly, "who is this man?" I pointed to the sketch of the figure with the snake tattoo. He didn't answer right away, his small hands trembling as he flipped to another page. On it, in blocky, uneven letters, was a name, Miguel. Beneath it, a partial phone number. This was the lead the investigators had been waiting for. Detective Marcus Reed, a seasoned investigator assigned to the case, worked tirelessly to follow the trail. Financial records began to surface, showing large, suspicious transactions between shell companies. Phone records revealed calls to known trafficking routes, all tied back to Richard. In court, the prosecution began connecting the dots. Tariq's sketches were introduced as evidence, alongside the financial records and intercepted communications. Diane's voice was calm but firm as she presented each piece, building a picture of Richard as more than just a foster parent. He was a key player in a trafficking operation. But the defense was relentless. Richard's lawyers attacked the credibility of the children, implying that their trauma had clouded their judgment. They dismissed Tariq's drawings as the product of a vivid imagination and suggested that Sarah had been manipulated into testifying by well-meaning but misguided adults. I sat in the gallery, my hands clenched into fists. As the defense twisted the narrative, Sarah's bravery shone through. Though, on the stand, her voice trembled at first but grew stronger as she recounted the horrors she and Tariq had faced. He said we weren't people, she told the court. Her eyes locked on Richard. He called us packages. The courtroom fell silent at her words, the weight of her truth hanging heavy in the air. Even Richard, for the first time, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Outside the courthouse that day, I found Sarah sitting on a bench, her knees pulled to her chest. I sat beside her, not saying anything at first. Then, softly, I said, "You were amazing in there. What you said, it mattered." She looked up at me, her eyes still filled with fear but also with determination. "Do you think they'll believe me?" she asked. I placed a hand on her shoulder. "I know they will. And no matter what happens, you've already shown more courage than most people ever could." As we sat there, I couldn't help but marvel at her resilience. Despite everything she had been through, Sarah had found the strength to stand up and tell her story. It was a reminder that, even in the darkest moments, the human spirit can endure and fight back. The breakthrough in the case came unexpectedly one rainy afternoon. Detective Marcus Reed called to update me on the investigation. His voice, usually calm and measured, carried a note of urgency. "We've tracked down the warehouse Tariq drew in his sketch," he said. "It matches a location linked to known trafficking routes. We're moving in tonight." The following morning, the news broke. A police raid on the warehouse had uncovered forged documents, burner phones, financial ledgers, and unsettling evidence that confirmed the facility had been used to hold and transport trafficked individuals. Most importantly, it established a direct link to Richard Hayes. His name appeared multiple times in the records, alongside details of transactions and communications with someone named Miguel, the man Tariq had sketched. The police wasted no time. Richard was arrested at his suburban home, his silver-haired composure cracking as officers placed him in handcuffs. Footage of his arrest spread quickly, capturing his once polished image now overshadowed by the weight of his crimes. The sight of him being led away brought a wave of relief, but also a grim understanding that the battle was far from over. The trial that followed was grueling. Richard's legal team threw every possible defense at the case, attempting to poke holes in the evidence and discredit the witnesses. They argued that the financial transactions were legitimate, that the warehouse had no direct ties to Richard's day-to-day activities, and that Sarah and Tariq's testimony was unreliable due to their trauma. Diane Porter, the prosecutor, was unshakable. Piece by piece, she dismantled the defense's arguments. Tariq's sketches became a cornerstone of the case, corroborated by the evidence found in the warehouse. His depiction of Miguel, the snake tattoo, and the layout of the facility were too detailed, too precise, to dismiss as mere imagination. But it was Sarah's testimony that delivered the most powerful blow. Taking the stand once more, she spoke with a clarity and strength that left the courtroom silent. She described the fear she had felt under Richard's control, the way he had monitored their every move, and the phone conversations she overheard about the package and the double payment. Her voice broke only once, when she spoke about Tariq's decision to hide in the cargo hold to save them both. "He told me it was the only way," she said, tears streaming down her face. "He said someone would find him and help us. And I knew it was our only chance." The defense tried to rattle her, questioning her memory and implying she had been influenced by others. But Sarah didn't waver. "I know what I heard," she said firmly. "I know what he did." As the trial progressed, the weight of the evidence became undeniable. Financial records, intercepted communications, and testimony from other witnesses all pointed to Richard's involvement in a sophisticated trafficking operation. The jury's expressions grew darker with each revelation. their discomfort visible as they connected the dots. The verdict came after days of deliberation. I sat with Sarah and Tariq in the gallery, my hands trembling as the jury filed back into the room. When the foreperson stood to read the decision, the room fell into a hush. On the count of human trafficking in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. A collective gasp rippled through the room. I felt Sarah's small hand grip mine tightly, her knuckles white. Tariq, sitting on her other side, sat motionless, his eyes fixed on the floor. On the count of child abuse, guilty. On the count of criminal conspiracy, guilty. Each pronouncement was like a weight lifting from my chest. Tears streamed down Sarah's face as the reality of the moment sank in. Richard Hayes, the man who had terrorized them, was finally being held accountable. The judge's sentencing was swift and decisive. Mr. Hayes, your actions represent a flagrant betrayal of trust and humanity. I sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As Richard was led away, his once confident demeanor had crumbled entirely. He avoided looking at the gallery, his shoulders hunched in defeat. The sight of him disappearing through the courtroom doors brought an overwhelming sense of closure. Outside, under a bright blue sky, Sarah turned to me, her face streaked with tears but lit with a smile I hadn't seen before. "We're free," she whispered, her voice filled with wonder and relief. I pulled her and Tariq into a tight hug, my heart swelling with pride for their courage and resilience. The journey wasn't over, but this was a victory, one that had been hard fought and deeply deserved. With the trial behind them, Sarah and Tariq began the slow journey toward rebuilding their lives. They were placed with a foster family. The Parkers, a kind couple who had dedicated their lives to creating a nurturing environment for children who had endured trauma. From the moment Sarah and Tariq stepped into their new home, it was clear this would be different. The Parker home was warm and welcoming, nestled in a quiet neighborhood with tree-lined streets. A garden bloomed in the backyard, filled with vibrant flowers and a small vegetable patch. The children's rooms had been thoughtfully prepared. Sarah's was painted in soft lavender with fairy lights strung across the ceiling, while Tariq's featured an art desk by the window, stocked with pencils, paints, and sketch pads. For the first few days, the siblings were cautious, their movements tentative. They kept their belongings close, as though ready to flee at a moment's notice. But the Parkers' patience and understanding began to work their magic. Slowly, Sarah and Tariq started to relax. Sarah joined Mrs. Parker in the kitchen, learning to bake cookies and asking questions about recipes. Tariq spent hours at his desk, creating detailed drawings that captured both the beauty of his new surroundings and the lingering shadows of his past. One evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Mrs. Parker suggested planting a tree in the backyard, a symbol of new beginnings. "It'll grow with us," she said, her warm smile reaching the children. Sarah and Tariq exchanged a look, and for the first time in what felt like forever, they smiled back. The tree planting ceremony was a quiet but profound moment. Together, they dug a small hole, placed the sapling carefully in the soil, and gently covered its roots. Tariq tied a ribbon around the trunk, and Sarah whispered, "Grow strong, just like us." As the sun set, casting golden light over the garden, it felt as though they were planting more than just a tree, they were planting hope. At school, Sarah began to thrive. She joined the debate team, surprising even herself with how much she enjoyed standing up and speaking her mind. Her teachers noticed her sharp intellect and gentle leadership, and her classmates quickly warmed to her kindness and determination. Tariq, still quieter, found solace in his art classes. His teacher, impressed by his talent, encouraged him to enter a statewide competition. To everyone's delight, his painting, a vibrant depiction of a tree breaking through storm clouds, won first place. I visited them regularly, staying involved in their journey. Each time, I saw new signs of their growth. Sarah would greet me with stories of her debate victories, her eyes shining with pride. Tariq, less verbal but no less expressive, would show me his latest sketches, each one more intricate than the last. One afternoon, during one of my visits, Sarah led me to the backyard to show me the tree. It had grown taller, its leaves lush and green, a testament to their resilience. "It's like us," she said, her voice soft but sure. "We were broken, but now we're growing again." Her words stayed with me long after I left that evening. Sarah and Tariq had faced unimaginable darkness. Yet here they were, not just surviving but flourishing. Their journey was far from over, but they were living proof that with love, patience, and the right support, healing was possible. The Parker home became a sanctuary, a place where they could rebuild their trust in the world and in themselves. And as the seasons passed, the sapling in the backyard grew stronger, its roots sinking deeper into the earth, just as Sarah and Tariq's roots were taking hold in their new lives. This was their new beginning, and it was beautiful to witness. As Sarah and Tariq found stability in their new lives, their journey continued to inspire me. The courage they had shown, the resilience they had built, it was extraordinary. But I couldn't ignore the haunting realization that there were more children like them, hidden in the shadows, waiting for someone to notice. Their story sparked an idea, one that began to take shape late at night as I sat at my kitchen table. Surrounded by scribbled notes and empty coffee cups, I decided to create a foundation, a safe haven for survivors of trafficking. A place where they could find support, healing, and hope. I called it Voices for the Silent, a name that honored Sarah and Tariq's bravery in speaking up when it mattered most. The foundation's mission was simple but profound, to ensure that no child would ever feel voiceless or alone again. The journey to establish the foundation was daunting. There were forms to file, partnerships to build, and funds to raise. But each challenge reminded me of Sarah and Tariq's strength, and I drew from that inspiration. Detective Marcus Reed, who had been instrumental in bringing Richard Hayes to justice, joined me as a co-founder. His expertise in law enforcement complemented my vision, and together, we began laying the groundwork for something bigger than either of us had imagined. Our first year was a whirlwind. We secured a modest office space, decorated with vibrant artwork from children who had found safety through our programs. Volunteers from all walks of life stepped forward, counselors, legal advocates, teachers, and artists, all driven by a shared commitment to make a difference. Sarah and Tariq became an integral part of the foundation. Sarah, now thriving in her new school, began mentoring younger children who were just starting their healing journeys. She had a natural gift for empathy, knowing exactly when to listen and when to offer gentle encouragement. Tariq contributed in his own way, designing the foundation's art therapy space. His sketches transformed the once sterile room into a sanctuary of creativity and expression. One afternoon, during a workshop at the foundation, Sarah led a group of younger children through a gardening activity. She showed them how to plant seeds, her voice steady and calm. "These plants need care and patience to grow," she explained, her words carrying a deeper meaning. "Just like us." Meanwhile, Tariq sat with a quiet boy named Marcus, guiding him through a drawing exercise. "Start with what makes you feel safe," Tariq said softly, handing Marcus a pencil. The boy hesitated, then began to draw a small house surrounded by trees. Tariq nodded approvingly, his encouragement helping Marcus find his own voice through art. Watching them, I felt a swell of pride. These two children, once so frightened and lost, were now beacons of hope for others. Their strength was contagious, their compassion boundless. They had turned their pain into purpose, and in doing so, they were changing lives. The foundation grew quickly, fueled by the passion of our team and the support of the community. We launched programs for legal aid, counseling, and job training, and we established partnerships with shelters and schools. Each new initiative was a step toward a world where every child could feel safe, valued, and heard. At our first anniversary event, Sarah stood on stage, her voice strong and clear as she shared her story with the audience. "I used to think being brave meant not being scared," she said, her gaze steady. "But I learned that real courage is speaking up even when you're terrified. That's how you make change." The audience rose to their feet, their applause echoing through the venue. I stood in the back, tears in my eyes, overwhelmed by the impact these children had made not just on my life, but on everyone who heard their story. Their voices, once silenced, now rang out with a clarity that could never be ignored. This was just the beginning. Voices for the Silent was growing, reaching more children every day, and every step forward was a testament to the power of love, resilience, and the human spirit. Together, we were creating a legacy of hope, one voice, one story, one life at a time. Years passed, and Voices for the Silent became more than I ever imagined. What started as a small effort to support survivors had grown into a national movement. Our foundation had helped hundreds of children find safety and healing. And with each success story, my heart swelled with gratitude. Yet, through it all, it was Sarah and Tariq who remained my constant source of inspiration. They had grown into remarkable young people. Sarah, now 15, was thriving in high school. She had become a leader in her debate team and a fierce advocate for children's rights, using her voice to call for change in local government policies. Her confidence was unshakable, and her passion lit up every room she entered. She never hesitated to tell her story, believing that it might help another child find the courage to speak up. Tariq, at 13, had blossomed into a gifted artist. His work was no longer confined to his sketchbooks. He had painted murals at the Foundation's headquarters, vibrant pieces that spoke of resilience and hope. One of his most famous works, A New Beginning, depicted a sunrise breaking through storm clouds. It had won him first place in a national art competition and hung proudly in the entrance of the Foundation, a daily reminder of how far he had come. One crisp autumn day, I received a package from Sarah and Tariq. Inside was a framed photograph of the two of them standing beneath a tree they had planted years ago in the Parker's backyard. The tree had grown tall and strong, its branches reaching for the sky. The siblings stood side by side, their smiles radiant, their arms around each other. Behind them, the sun cast golden light over their home, and the mural on the garage wall, a scene of mountains and forests, seemed to glow. There was a letter tucked beneath the frame. Sarah's neat handwriting filled the page, and I read each word carefully, my chest tightening with emotion. "Dear Maggie, do you remember when you told me that brave people aren't fearless, but they act despite their fear? That thought has stayed with me. It's what gives me strength when I stand on stage to share my story or when I mentor younger kids at the Foundation. You taught me that my voice matters." Tariq and I are doing so well. He's creating art that inspires people. And I'm working toward a future where no child has to go through what we did. The tree in this photo has grown so much. Just like us. Its roots are deep and strong now, and its branches stretch toward the sky. It reminds me of everything you've done for us. You didn't just save us that day on the plane. You gave us a new life, a new purpose. Thank you, Maggie, for believing in us when no one else did. With love, Sarah and Tariq. Tariq had added his own touch, a sketch of the note Sarah had slipped me on the plane, framed by delicate butterflies symbolizing transformation. It was both a tribute to their journey and a reminder of the courage it took to start it. The photograph and letter now sit on my desk at Voices for the Silent, where I see them every day. They remind me why I do this work and of the power one act of kindness can have. That small, crumpled note from Sarah had changed everything, not just for her and Tariq, but for the countless children we've helped since then. Looking back, I realize that the story wasn't just about saving Sarah and Tariq. It was about showing them that they had the strength to save themselves, to rebuild their lives, and to inspire others. Their journey was proof that even in the darkest moments, there is hope. Now, as I watch new children walk through the doors of the foundation, I see the same fear that Sarah and Tariq once carried. But I also see something else, the promise of healing, of growth, of a brighter future. Their voices may tremble at first, but with love and support, they grow stronger. And that, more than anything, is the legacy Sarah and Tariq have left behind, a legacy of hope, courage, and transformation. It's a legacy that will continue to light the way for generations to come. As the sun set over the bustling community center where voices for the silent now thrived, Maggie glanced at the framed photo of Sarah and Tariq on her desk. It reminded her of how far they had come, from fear to freedom, from silence to strength. Their journey wasn't just a story of survival, it was a testament to the power of resilience and the profound impact of compassion. Every child helped by the foundation carried a piece of Sarah and Tariq's legacy, their voices joining a growing chorus of courage and hope. Maggie smiled, knowing this was just the beginning of many lives yet to be transformed. If you found this story inspiring, subscribe to Life Stories for more real-life tales of bravery, hope, and transformation. Together, let's continue to shine a light on the extraordinary journeys that remind us of the strength within us all.